The Isle of Skye is one of the most dramatic places in the Scottish Highlands, a fairy tale island of wild roads, brutal weather, cinematic cliffs, and landscapes that almost feel unreal. But here's what nobody tells you about an Isle of Skye road trip. The things that go wrong are often exactly what make it unforgettable. In this Scotland travel vlog, I'm taking you through our full journey captured in 4K from the ferry crossing to ferry pools, Neist Point, Coral Beach and Portree, including the real costs, the honest mistakes, and the hard lessons I wish I knew before driving in Scotland. The morning we drove toward Mallaig ferry terminal. The rain was already hammering down, and honestly, that set the tone for everything that followed. We boarded the Caledonian Bhradain ferry with our car, having paid €25 in advance for 2 people and 1 vehicle. The crossing took about half an hour, and we spent it with 2 €6 coffees in hand, watching the dramatic sea views through the window. Even before reaching Skye Island, the atmosphere had already shifted, the air felt heavier, the landscape sharper. When we arrived in Armadale, the geography changed almost instantly. Suddenly, this wasn't just another stop on a Scotland road trip itinerary. It felt like we had crossed into a wilder, more unpredictable version of the Highlands, and I knew right then that this day would be nothing like what we had planned. After leaving Armadale, we drove about 40 minutes to our first real stop, Bhradain, a roadside waterfall where the elements hit us with full force. This was the moment the real Scottish road trip adventure began, not the postcard version, the actual one. 10 minutes further, we stopped at Sligachan Old Bridge, where the Collie and Mackenzie statue stands against the mountains. The conditions were getting worse by the minute, and I started remembering what my friends had warned me about this island. At the time, I honestly thought, how hard can it be? I've traveled in much tougher conditions before. Standing there, completely soaked and shivering, I was beginning to understand exactly what they meant, and this was only the beginning. After Sligachan, we continued toward one of the most famous places on the Isle of Skye, ferry pools. The drive took around 24 minutes through some of the most unique landscapes I've ever seen, but when we arrived, we had to make the first big decision of the day. Our friends who had been here just a week earlier told us the hike would take at least an hour to an hour and a half. We looked at the wind, the distance, the fact that the day had barely started, and we cancelled it. It wasn't easy. Ferry pools is one of the most photographed places in Scotland, and part of me really wanted to push through. But I knew we'd lose too much energy, get completely soaked, and probably not capture the footage we were hoping for. This is where travel planning meets reality. Sometimes protecting the rest of your day matters more than checking off a famous spot. And honestly, I'm glad we made that call because what came next was the most beautiful drive of the entire day. The road toward Talisker Bay Beach took about 25 minutes, and I kept stopping just to look at the endless green fields, the quiet roads, and sheep and lambs eating along the roadside like we had entered a completely different world. When we reached Talisker Bay, we ran into the same practical problem that kept coming back during our Isle of Skye road trip: parking. No parking signs everywhere, and to reach the beach, you often need to park quite far and walk. I walked closer, flew the drone, captured a few scenes, and we got back on the road. About 15 minutes later, we stopped at Oyster Shed, a fish and chips spot with good reviews, where we paid €22 for mixed seafood and fries, ate quickly with a view, and continued deeper into the island. If you're planning to visit the Isle of Skye, one thing you absolutely need to be ready for is the narrow roads. In many parts of the island, the roads are only wide enough for one vehicle, and every 30 to 50 meters there are small passing places where one driver pulls in, waves, and lets the other pass. It's a beautiful system when everyone's patient, but for visitors not used to driving in Scotland, especially in rough weather, it can be genuinely stressful. We made a quick stop near Loch, but the wind and cold were so intense we couldn't stay long. So we pushed on through narrow roads between farmlands until we finally reached one of the most cinematic places on the Isle of Skye, Neist Point. The lighthouse, built in 1909, sits at the edge of dramatic cliffs facing the Atlantic. The walking route normally takes about an hour to an hour and a half, but with the extreme conditions that day, this became the most physically challenging stop of the entire trip. After Neist Point, we drove about 35 minutes to Dunvegan Castle. We didn't plan to pay 20 euros per person to enter instead. We found a small open area nearby and captured drone shots from the outside. Then another 17 minutes to Coral Beach, a place normally known for its almost Caribbean-style white sand and turquoise water, one of the most surprising landscapes in the Scottish Highlands. But on this day, the conditions simply didn't give us that version of Coral Beach. And this is something I need to be completely honest about. The Isle of Skye can be absolutely stunning, but Skye's unpredictability can change everything: what you see, what you feel, and what kind of footage you walk away with. By this point, we were getting tired, hotel check-in was approaching, and after another 50 minutes drive, we headed toward Portree. After a long and exhausting day, we checked into Greenacres guest house in Portree, often considered the capital of the Isle of Skye. This beautiful seaside guest house was only around 2 minutes by car from the harbor, had an incredible view, and cost us 245 euros for the night. After resting for a while, we drove into the center of Portree around sunset and parked in the central car park for 3.5 euros. At first, the town felt strangely quiet for such a famous island destination, maybe because of the rain, maybe because our expectations were too high. But as we walked between hotels and restaurants, we slowly moved toward the Portree Harbour view that we had been imagining all day. Then, little by little, the colorful buildings started appearing above the rooftops, the streets became more alive, and we reached that beautiful viewpoint above the harbor. For a few minutes, we simply stood there and admired the view, the colorful houses lined up by the water, the green hill behind them, the church above the town, and the whole scene fitting together like a painting. Walking through the center of Portree, I felt that classic United Kingdom small-town atmosphere very strongly, and then as we went down toward the harbor, I felt as if I was walking through the set of an old film. After the magic of the colorful buildings faded a little, we started noticing the other angles of Portree: houses on green hills, fishing boats resting in the water, quiet corners of the harbor, and hotels sitting almost perfectly along the sea. Looking at those seaside hotels, I honestly felt that if I were a writer, I could rent a tiny room here with one small window and maybe write one of the most unforgettable novels in the world. By then, the day was getting late, and even though the final views of Portree had helped us forget how tired we were, we realized we were hungry. Since we could not stay inside one of those harbor hotels, I still wanted to at least say that we had dinner inside one of the colorful buildings, so we went straight into the restaurant inside the blue one. At the Pier Hotel restaurant, a small place facing the sea with only 6 tables and a tiny window view, we paid 53 euros including drinks, and had an incredibly delicious fish and chips with oysters. After dinner, as the day came to an end, we climbed the stairs toward the upper part of town, passing a small church, a medical center, and the terrace of Skye Gathering Hall, where we found ourselves looking at another beautiful angle of Portree: the rooftops, the calm harbor water, the boats waiting for their next journey, the traditional British pubs, and the international restaurants all gave the town a cultural richness that felt much bigger than its size. Finally, after a very long day, we returned to our hotel to rest before what would become an even more intense 4th day in Scotland and our 2nd full day on the Isle of Skye. For this full Isle of Skye road trip day, our real visible spending was 25 euros for the Mallaig to Armadale Ferry for 2 people and 1 car, 6 euros for coffees on the ferry, 22 euros at Oyster Shed, 14 euros at Bogmissile Cafe, 245 euros for Greenacres guest house in Portree, 3.5 euros for parking in Portree, and 53 euros for dinner at the Pier Hotel restaurant. That makes a total of 368.5 euros for 2 people, or around 184.25 euros per person. But this does not include car rental, fuel, insurance, flights, or any wider Scotland road trip costs from the previous days. If you want to do a more budget-friendly version of this route, the biggest savings would come from choosing cheaper accommodation, packing snacks or lunch, skipping paid attractions like Dunvegan Castle if you are short on budget, and planning your route carefully so you don't waste fuel or time driving back and forth across the island. The biggest personal mistake of the day was probably underestimating the Isle of Skye weather and overloading the itinerary with too many ambitious stops for one day, especially with ferry pools, Neist Point, Dunvegan Castle, Coral Beach and Portree all in the same route. Some of the difficulties were not really anyone's fault. Narrow single-track roads, limited parking, no parking signs, long walks from legal parking areas, and unpredictable conditions are all part of visiting a remote and fragile island landscape. And in many ways these rules also protect local life, nature, and the experience itself. But for travelers, they can still make the day harder than expected. I've personally seen travelers lose energy by midday because they tried to do everything at once, and this time I was that traveler. So my honest advice is this: respect the island, respect the signs, slow down, keep your plan flexible, and understand that on the Isle of Skye, the things that go wrong are often exactly what make the journey unforgettable. So, is the Isle of Skye worth visiting? Absolutely yes, but not because everything is easy, comfortable, or perfectly planned. It is worth visiting because it feels wild, cinematic, emotional, and unpredictable. Sicily taught me that imperfection is what makes a place special, and Skye proved that same lesson in a completely different way. Even on a day when the conditions change your plans, the roads challenge you, and some stops don't look the way you imagined, the island still gives you moments you will remember for years. This was the third video of my Scotland travel series, and if you are planning your own Scotland road trip, Scottish Highlands road trip, or Isle of Skye itinerary, check the useful booking links in the description for hotels, flights, car rental, travel services, and other deals.